Hello and welcome back to Speed Demon Painting, where today we are taking a look at the new Imperium Order of Battle, which is now at version 1.08. This is by far the biggest ORBAT there is, because it is the most fleshed out of the major factions out there, and for this reason I will be handling it in a slightly different manner. I will be going over the generic weapons and equipment, like always, but then I'm going to split it up, not in a flagship versus the cruisers and mass one ships kind of way like I usually do, but I'm going to divide it up into different sub-nations, the nations you find within this larger faction. So we'll be splitting it up first in a part discussing the Prussians and the Teutonic ones. That's technically the stuff that is already out there when this one was released. And then I'll be talking about the new Bavarian Airships and the Scandinavian ones, and all of them together, flagships and normal cruisers. Now, before we start discussing any of the different ships though, let's go over the general rules for this faction, and there have been a few tweaks as well to the Imperium weapon qualities. First of all, Voltaic is a rule that normally you suffer 2 disorder conditions if you suffer a critical hit. That remains the same way. It used to say that it would also automatically cause a generator offline critical damage marker if the target you were shooting had an online shield generator. This has now been expanded to also include storm generators, and because the crown no longer uses shield generators, the guardian generators again can only be found in that particular faction, but slight expanse of that rule. Same thing with Inductorium. This is more of a clarification. That means you just essentially ignore the escorts when you use the Inductorium rule, and Inductorium is only used when you're shooting and not when you're assaulting. So just a bit of clarification: if you for instance have a flagship that comes with 3 small escorts, Inductorium is a rule where you can throw extra dice if you throw a high number of critical hits. It now says that if you do a flagship with 3 escorts, you only need to roll 2 critical hits, and then this rule will trigger, but it will only trigger for 1 extra dice, not 4, because the unit only consists or takes into account the main flagship in this rule. So just a bit of clarification. Lightning Assault is also clarified that supporting models cannot use this extra rule, so you can't add extra dice for a supporting model. It is the usual +2 assault dice, not +3 in this one. And also it's the assaulting model, which is just a small word change, that can get +2 extra assault dice if it has an online storm generator. Supercharged Munitions has received a bit of extra clarification. It means you can fire 3 guns at full primary value, at lead value, and it's just been made clear that the 2 supporting weapons use the lead value, and that you can't get 3 extra lead values out of it. Same way that the heavy magazine rule was changed, really, so nothing really weird about that. In terms of the battle fleets, there have been a few small tweaks into it, not so much into the Imperium battle fleet, but the Elector battle fleet has got a new extra rule to it. Usually you had to, or in the past you had to include a full Blücher unit, and then your flagship would get a heavy spear Schleuder if you did so. This has been changed. Now the Elector class ship gains the Luftlanzer assault rule, which is one that you can see at the Blücher for more details. Now it means it can launch assaults within 6 inch rather than the normal 4 inch. Now Elector class battleships are already absolute maniacally good units in boarding actions, in assaults, and this just makes them straight up better. And seeing as they now get heavy spear Schleuders as a standard, this is just a big old buff to the Elector battle fleet, so that's a great first change. And another one that I personally love is in the Teutonic battle fleet. The Teutonic battle fleet has been changed so that you can now include 2 units with the Vitruvian Colossus trait. Why am I such a big fan of it? Well, Vitruvian Colossuses used to be allowed to have, or well, they still can, have 3 Metzgers with a Hochmeister as a support. However, you can no longer include this within the same battle fleet. Because, well, you used to not be able to, because you are only allowed one Vitruvian unit in that one. This changes it now. You can actually have your unit of Metzgers with a Hochmeister leading them, which is a great change in my book. Now, onto the different equipment that they have. The Freya array was buffed. It now doesn't necessarily function mostly as a coherency extender, but it just gives extra ADV and a point of SDV if you take it. This is a straight up buff to what it used to be, and a welcome one because well, that wasn't the most enticing option before. Also, they gained a new special type of aerial escort called the Pflicht, which is mostly there to help your aircraft, the Luftstreitkräfte. So yeah, you get extra ones of these. Storm Veins is also a rule mostly found on those aerial ships, where you can make a lightning strike attack, albeit using one of the crippled values. The Storm Generator, which we'll get to in a bit, has been changed to actually have a full weapon profile, and the Storm Veins is the light version of this, where you can use attacking the crippled value, so you can throw 10 dice with the arc quality at an opponent if you have it. A very big change is the what used to be the Flak Vierling. It's no longer really classed as a flak weapon now, it's just an autocannon, a quad-barreled weapon designed at strafing at targets, especially those closed-range aerial targets. It's a weapon that still gains the sustained quality against aerial units and skimming units, so that hasn't changed. What has changed though is that it now gets extra dice in support, so that's a big change, because usually those weapons had to work together to fire at a single unit. But why does it mention the close-ranged aerial targets now? Aerial has been changed, so in the past, if you were shooting at something that was an aerial target, you would now count everything as being one range band further than it was, meaning if you're shooting at something at closing range, you have to use the point blank range, and if you were shooting at something at closing range, you would have to use the long range in the rules, which means no dice whatsoever. So if you're shooting at an aerial target, you can only really do so if you're shooting at it from point blank. But if you're shooting at an aerial target at point blank, it's going to be a mighty efficient weapon because you gain the sustained quality out of it. So that's now cleared up in a way. And this Vierling autocannon can be found on quite a lot of ships, and getting extra support, an extra dice in support, is a very welcome upgrade, even with the increased difficulty of shooting at aerial ships. When it comes to generators, you get the same, the warning that you can never have duplicate generators and that they do not offer any cumulative effects if you use them. That's something we've seen in every faction, so I'm not going to go too much into it. The shield generator has been clarified to not work against assaults, so that's a small thing. But the storm generator has changed, and it's the changes in general are that you now have more range, because it used to only be applicable if you shot at a target within 15 inch. So you got more range. It comes with that profile, but the benefit in a defensive way has been nerfed substantially. It used to make you obscured as a bonus. It no longer works that way. It sort of gets you the benefit from the shroud generator, where heavy hits are sort of downgraded, if you will, to normal hits. But the big nerf to it, I think, is that it used to say that if you fired the shroud generator, the defensive bonus will last until the next activation of that ship. That's no longer the case. The defensive bonus, which was lessened already, only applies for that round. So no longer can your ship sit in relative safety until the next activation. That's a big change to the storm generator in general. So, when we're looking at the Imperium weapon reference, we're going to see quite a few new entries. The first two being the flak broadside and the heavy flak broadside. These are flak weapons that have the sustained rule instead of the fusillade, so making them instantly better at medium range. And even the normal flak broadside at 4-2 is something you could see doing some damage at medium range. These can mostly be found again on the new airships, and they're very good and very solid entries in my book. The lightning strike was sort of touched upon when we were talking about the storm vanes and the new storm generator. This is the firing profile for it. There's also a new entry called Luftspeerschleuder, which are torpedo attacks that are being fired from the sky. The big difference being that compared to normal torpedoes, they don't get extreme range, but they do get high velocity as a change. So you can't stack the air variant of your torpedoes with the normal ones because they don't share the same weapon profile. But I thought it was an interesting entry at least. The only thing that slightly irked me, this is more an OCD thing of mine, is that the normal Speerschleuder has 7 dice in point blank and the Luft version has only 6, and the same goes for the crippled value, it's just 1 dice less. And it's just a bit weird that you have different weapon profiles on it. It's just that extra little thing to remember during gameplay, while I don't think it makes a massive difference, but okay. The next one is the Rüdiger autocannon. You can find that one mostly again on the new airships. It does seem like a weapon that is mostly usable at close range, because I'm looking at a gunnery weapon with only a single dice in support. So forget shooting at anything with a blade of armor. That's never going to work and never going to do anything to it. But as a weapon goes, it's not bad because of the sustained rule. Just as long as you remember not to aim this at anything with a blade of armor, you'll be good. I can see the matchup against Russians being a nightmare though if you are spamming these types of weapons. Then a new one is the uranium trialen bombs. These are bombs that only shoot at closing range, so you're sort of dropping them, and they can be found on the big Zeppelin airship, and it can only be fired in the back. So this one really is a case of you fly over a target and you then drop a bunch of uranium bombs on them. Looks good from when looking at it, but you do have to throw all of those dice separately. But with blast and bomb, can be interesting to do so. And then of course the change to the Vierling autocannon that we just touched upon as well gains an extra dice when it comes to the support value, so that's great. And another change, this is one that only affects the Reiter ship for now, is those 3 flak Vierlings, as they used to be called, on that little platform are now rolled into a single Vierling flak array. So I included the old version of the flak Vierling as a comparison. This used to be 3 of them. So if you took your 5 dice and you added 2 times 3 support, you used to be able to fire 11 dice at the opponent. That's now down to 10, so you have lost a few dice compared to the old situation. And it gets progressively worse as you add more support to it, because you used to only lose 2 dice when you were adding support or extra ones in support of those platforms. That has been reduced by a hefty 6. But before you get too sad, this one is now always sustained. And let's not forget, if this one becomes sustained because you're shooting at an aerial target, you can effectively link those 2 weapons together still. So it's just that the Vierling flak array is now effectively just that flak weapon that it's supposed to be. So small change there. And then a straight up buff to end off the things. The normal Volt Gun battery is now 5 dice as the lead value instead of the 4 that it used to have, bringing the dice number to parity with the normal gun battery, whereas before it used to have a smaller one. However, that change is reflected in the points cost of most of the ships equipped with them, as we'll see later down the line. Right, onto the Imperium flagships, and we're not just doing all of the flagship in one go. Like I said at the start of the video, we'll be going over the ones from the Prussian Empire first, along with the Teutonic ones, and then going over to the new Bavarian airships, and then the Scandinavians. So it creates a clearer picture in my book. Now, if you like to see these changes and keep up to date with the game, and you like this type of content, make sure that you hit the like button and subscribe to the video for more of these types of updates. And if you like this new format better than you did before, make sure to tell me in the comments if you like it better that way, because later down the line we're going to be seeing more of these smaller nations introduced into every other ORBAT, and it might actually help to keep things more neatly organized this way. Now, as far as the different flagships go, the Prussian ones sure were buffed across the line in a spectacular fashion, so I think most of the hitting power is still going to be in these ones. The Elector battleship starts off with a nice little 5-point drop compared to what it used to be, and it gets +2 citadel in both crippled and battle-ready stadiums, so that's a great start to begin with. And, like I briefly touched upon at the start of the video, they now standard come with the heavy torpedo, which is of course called the Speerschleuder in this faction. Other than that, there's not been many changes to what it was, except for of course the small change to the spotter rule that we have found in the other ORBATs as well. You can only apply spotter if it's being directly attacked by an SRS token. That means the thing that you are targeting. A very big change, however, comes to the Kaiser upgrade to the Elector battleship. This is the Kaiser Elector Heavy battleship. It used to be a +40 point upgrade. It's now +50, so it's 10 points extra. But then you lose your Gustav Heavy Bombard and you just replace it with 4 volt guns essentially on this ship. And what do you get for your extra points? Well, first of all, you get a Blade of Armor, which is already a huge upgrade. It can really protect against those volleys of small gun batteries and lots of broadsides being pointed at you. But that all-important new command and control rule, which is a rule that allows you to negate the opponent's valor cards when he's playing it by discarding your own valor cards until you've reached the initiative value or exceed it of the card being played by your opponent. It's an amazingly good ability in the game, and I love the fact that it is tied to one of my personal favorite ships within the Prussian Imperium roster, and that is the Kaiser Elector. So big thumbs up for that unit, it's amazing. And if we're going to look at the different named versions of Electors and Kaiser ships, we're seeing points drops across the board with the same increase in Citadel and the heavy Speerschleuder, so it's all good. The named ones are also a lot more appealing this way, and you can really consider them as well in the roster that you're taking. The SMS Tirpitz has gone up a bit by 10 points, which is in line with the changes to command and control that you're getting as well. But big thing to notice here though, it has lost that spotter rule that it used to have. So it's not that different anymore compared to the old vanilla, rather the new vanilla Kaiser ship. So I'm not sure if I would consider upgrading it to the SMS Tirpitz, but that's up to you as well if you want to. The Heidelberg Logistics Battlecruiser has been immensely buffed, with not just +2 but +3 to the different Citadel values, making it a lot more appealing, and the same heavy Speerschleuder treatment that you're getting as well. So this one is a lot more appealing in general, and the Holzendorf loadout as well, because this is the one that has the spotter rule, and seeing as it now has the heavy torpedo salvo, you're actually getting more bang for your buck out of that one. When it comes to the different Ice Maiden variants, it's also good news across the board for the Imperium, because the Ice Maidens have also been graced with a +2 Citadel across the board, both in battle ready and crippled. And that was really their weak point. They used to only be at Citadel 10, meaning they would suffer critical hit after critical hit, and you would always find them being in a full chaos and disarray status. So yeah, that's a great change already. And we see a points reduction as well. There's 10 points deducted for them. And they come now with the Vierling Autokanon, the new and improved version, chucking more dice, so that's great. They also took out, because there's a lot of red text in here, that's just the Blitzenbomber rule, which used to be at the start in the sort of equipment section, has now been changed and only applies to, or is written every time that you have something with special SRS tokens. So it's a bit more convenient this way, I think, so it's good that they write it this way. The Eiskalte Schönheit has not just dropped 10 points, but has gone a massive 30 points. And this was already my favorite ship to begin with, because it had that trio of Gustav Heavy Bombard, along with this, where is it? The rule that says that you can fight the supercharged munitions. That means that every one of those Gustav Heavy Bombards is shooting with 14 dice, and that always has been a favorite of mine, so nice to see the Eiskalte Schönheit getting some extra love in this ORBAT. And the one that has gotten the most love is the Prinzessin Wilhelmina. That's the one that just has all the heavy volt gun batteries, and that one also has a Freya array on it as well. And you can tell when you're looking at the different stats, because the Freya array was buffed, it's just seeing more stat increases across the board for both ADV and SDV, making this one a very tough cookie to crack. And this is the one that is most special, because this is the Ice Maiden variant that comes with command and control. Again, that amazing rule that allows you to counter spells, acts as a counter spell, I should say, for your opponent's Valor cards. I think this one is so worth considering to swap to the Princesses Wilhelmina. You must also not forget that the Ice Maidens were buffed indirectly, because it's now cleared up that you measure everything hull to hull when it comes to firing weapons, and that used to be something that was unclear in the previous versions of the rule. The fact that you have such a massive ship and you have to measure ranges that way means that you can get into the ideal range very, very quickly if you want to with the Ice Maidens, so they get the big thumbs up for me. They were already very fun to play with to begin with. And then the Konig generator ship is one that I found baffling that this one was reduced in points. I already thought it was massively effective at 250, and this has been reduced by 13, and it has received the different upgrades. It's still a bit low on hull points though, they kept it that way, so maybe that's why the 237 is more applicable. And it's just now stating that the projector for the different generators it has do not apply to any escorts that come with it within 7 inch of this model, and I think that includes things with escort duty, so yeah, this is still a bit oddly worded, I think, but I suppose this now makes it clear that your escorts just don't get it, and I suppose escort duty falls under that as well. Next up is the Templehof Fleet Carrier, which has also seen a 5 points reduction, and comes now with the Vierling Autokanon instead of the Flak Vierling, of course. And because of the buff to the Freya array, we're seeing a similar increase in stats across the board, both to ADV and SDV, so this one has gone up quite substantially in my book. There's the Templehof Blitzen Heavy Carrier. I strongly advise against this ship as it is, but I'm planning to do a whole separate video on the current problems with SRS tokens used in an offensive manner, especially on flagships, so stay tuned for that video. Make sure to follow us if you want to see that one, because the SRS tokens are still not in a great spot in my book. Next up is the Zeppelin Aerial Dreadnought. Now, I wasn't sure if I should discuss this with the Bavarians, but it technically has the Prussian keyword by now, so I'm including it with the Prussians. As a flagship goes, you're not really getting a lot of armor, but I suppose that's only normal for a thing with an aerial unit. They are fairly hard to target with the new changes to the range bands, so getting or expecting an armor 8 on these would make normal ships absolutely obsolete, so that's not something I want to see either. So, in terms of defenses, it's sort of got cruiser-like armor for an aerial ship. That's not horrible, like I said, and still a respectable 8 and 6 hull points in battle ready and crippled state. So it's not horrible, and you're paying 350 points for it. That's reasonable. When you look at the amount of firepower it brings, though, that's a lot. There's a lot of firepower there. There's the Sturmbringer, aimed at the front, which can always be scary as hell, and 4 heavy rocket batteries. Remember, you can only fire 3 of them at lead value because of the supercharged munitions rule that it has, but that's still a scary amount of firepower from that Zeppelin. And it comes with the heavy flak broadsides. Remember that those are also fairly effective even at closing range, because they just have the sustained rule instead of the fusillade rule, so that's a scary thing. And those bombs that I mentioned at the start of the video are the ones that you have to fire in the aft, so you're supposed to fly over enemy ships with this thing. Seeing how it has a drift of 4 with a speed of 5, it remains to be seen just how big the base of that model is, because apparently this is a big one, if we are to believe Stuart, how easy it is going to be to fly over those ships. But yeah. Also, it comes with the Luftlanzer Assault, so it can assault within 6 inch rather than the usual 4, so it's worth checking out the fray, and we see a massive fray of 10. Mind you, it doesn't get that many benefits from the what's it called, the Lightning Assault rule, because it doesn't really have that many things with the voltaic or arc weapons on board, so that's the thing to keep in mind though. It can change out the Sturmbringer for an Übervoltvierling or 2 of those torpedo speerschleuders for no extra cost. Now, the big reason to consider the Luftspeerschleuder is that they were voltaic weapons, so you are going to increase your fray value if you opt for the different the torpedoes rather than the Sturmbringer. Your fray is going to go up by 1 point, so worth keeping in back of mind. And you can take 3 of those aerial escorts as well. It can flak shoot enemy SRS tokens out of the sky, which is a very cool rule in my book due to the flak barrage, but like I said earlier, SRS are already not in a great position, and seeing them being shot out of the sky by these things can make things significantly worse for them. So yeah, I'd like to see some changes in that in a future update to the game. One rule that it does get that I think is super cool, if you read the fluff piece, it says that it's storing its different helium gas canisters along with its weapons in the whole construction, and that makes it extra susceptible to the magazine explosion critical damage. You will suffer 2 points of damage if you have that one. I love small little fluff rules like these. The Ice Maiden has that as well. If you suffer from that Sturginium flare, it'll create extra damage, and the Zeppelins have that as well. This one also gets the lumbering rules, so if you're being shot at with gunnery weapons, expect those to be extra effective. But you can also do a full reverse if you want without suffering disorder, and once at chaos and disarray, any additional points of damage is just straight up ignored, so you can't just put this one at chaos and disarray and then just start doing minor critical hits to melt away those hull points very, very quickly. So yeah, that's something to remember. Also, I'm thinking this is the artwork for it. It's worth mentioning that I think it's weird that the rules do not have anything for SRS tokens associated with it, when this artwork clearly shows a landing deck and SRS tokens doing their thing on top of it. So I'm not sure, you know, these are just beta test rules for now, but I'm wondering if it's this ship, are these the rules we're seeing for them, or are they going to be polished once the actual release gets here? I'm thinking it's going to be the latter. Now, onto the normal ships for the Prussians and the Teutonic ones, the ones that are released already. The Arminius frigate saw a few changes. It's been upped by a pretty big, plus 5 points per model, but when we're looking at the stat line, you can sort of see why. It's got an extra point of armor, 4 extra citadel, and 3 hull points. So you're not just blasting these things out of the water left, right, and center with single heavy gun batteries like you could in the past, and that's a very good deal. Also, you gotta remember, the small volt gun battery was buffed, so that's probably included in the points cost for this model. But yeah, it's got heavy competition when it comes to mass 1 ships as well. The Augustus Bombard Cruiser has been upped by a massive 10 points, which is quite a lot for it. Without really, well, it gets the +2 citadel across the board, of course, but that one's rather normal. So this is a tap on the fingers for this particular ship, which could have been very good in the past already. And like I said, I always find this ship to be in a bit of a tricky position, because if you want to take a full squadron of 3 of these, you end up paying 375 points. And if you then consider that the Eiskalte Schönheit exists within this same ORBAT, you'd almost have to be soft in the head not to go for the Eiskalte Schönheit as a separate flagship. It can be its own fleet after all, because it'll gain you 2 extra command points, it'll slap 4 extra of those the bombers in there, 8 extra SRS tokens, all the extra weapons when it comes to the flak feelings and all of that just for 95 extra points. So I think that is a no-brainer, and that puts the Augustus Bombard Cruiser in a bit of a tough spot within this ORBAT in my book. Next up is the Blücher, the cruiser. This one was a bit of a controversial one because a small bit of background history to this as well. This ORBAT wasn't just released into the wild, it was first released as a draft, and then an almost not a draft version, and then this final version. And the Blücher was just upped in points cost without really any reasons, making it fall behind quite a bit with the other ships historically. Now the final version is one that I'm quite happy with though. The Blücher is now 100 points, which is 8 points more than before. It gets that traditional upgrade as well. So what do the extra 8 points get you? Well, first of all, it's got a torpedo now, the Speerschleuder attack, which is already a great deal. And it has gained the Luftlanzer assault, meaning it can assault within 6 inches rather than the usual 4. This makes it an incredibly versatile ship. I mean, it can hang back with its torpedoes, it can engage into closing range quite well as well with the heavy volt gun batteries, and then when the enemy gets even closer, you've got a bit of a frightening extra bit of reach on your assault as well, so I'm really liking the Blücher. The other reason why I really loved the fact that they gave these a Speerschleuder is that in the previous ORBAT, these hulls, you had to go and dig through the rules of like, does my hull have a torpedo attack or not? Because the Blücher didn't, most of the other similar hulls did, and it was just a bit, odd that you'd have one ship, not 2 of them, because the Ferdinand also didn't have a Speerschleuder attack to it, that suddenly didn't have them, while all the rest did. And they almost fixed that. We'll talk about this when we get to the Volsung, why I think that it is a great change to see it changed here, but it was a bit of a case of 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, as we'll see down the line. But in other words, the Blücher cruiser, I don't think it's a tax whatsoever anymore on your fleet. I would happily pay 100 points for this type of cruiser. Our friends over at the Markov Dossier podcast were already discussing their recent game of Dystopian Wars, and one of the co-hosts did say that the Blücher was a bit of a disappointing amount of firepower in the old version, and I think that's going to be changed with this new one, so big thumbs up. Next up is the specialized version of the Ferdinand Advanced Cruiser. It's now 13 points more expensive, but it gets the new and improved Vierling autocannon as well, and it gains extra, in this case, turn limit, making it more agile, and extra fray as well in both states. So you do get why this one's a bit more expensive than the other one. It, however, does not get that extra reach in the assault compared to the Blücher, but it's still something I would, consider if you're doing a Teutonic fleet for sure, because it can still escort duty those, and you've got a rather scary ship to do that. So the Ferdinand Advanced Cruiser are also very positive changes in my book. There's also less screwing around with the different keywords in this one. It very much is a ship designed for the Teutonic fleet now, doing the escort duty for it, so it's got a more clearly defined role now, I think, and that's great, because it used to fall shy across the board compared to the Volsung cruiser, but the Volsung has had the saddest change of them all. It also gained the Speerschleuder, which is great to see that lore element of having the same hull, just with different weapon configurations on the rail system, be more implemented here. And now, a big one that needed a change, and did it get it? It's the Hochmeister Vitruvian Colossus. In-game, it was a bit of an odd one, especially for your opponent, because a unit of 3 Hochmeisters would just come in and obliterate anything it touched, because the assault was way too scary when you compared it with the old unexpected arrival rule. So there have been plenty of tweaks to it. First of all, the good news. It's getting +2 to its citadel in both crippled and battle ready state, as you see with most ships. Here's the weird one. It now has 4 hull points in its crippled state, which is a buff by +2. But this is a bit of, in Dutch, there's an expression that says that is a poisoned gift, because technically you do not want any crippled ships surviving in your unit, and this remains the case. Why is that? Well, this rule now, it used to be called the Zeitwahl, it's now called Strategic Withdrawal. If the unit is battle ready, as a special operations, you may be placed back into reserves to launch another devastating assault on the enemy, potentially. However, once something is crippled, you're no longer allowed to use that, so I personally like to see my Colossi die, just straight up die, once they're crippled, because your unit is almost pinned down. So, might look like it's a big upgrade, but it's a double-edged sword, that one. Now, the other big change is to the Blitzschlacht 200. Normally, you would get +3 fray for every model within coherency of that model when it makes an assault. It's now +4 fray, but it's only one time. The only thing you need to do to trigger this is have another model in the unit with this rule. And in Metzger units, it doesn't get that one, sadly. So the Blitzschlacht 200 is only really into effect if that one is in a unit of other Hochmeisters. And unless the unit has deployed in this round with the unexpected arrival rule, you now gain +5 to the assault dice pool. That used to be the case before as well, but the big change is now that you can't use it when popping up out of the sea, making the initial assault of the Hochmeister unit a much more bearable prospect. I mean, it can go wrong every now and then if your dice aren't on your side for the Hochmeister player, but before it was just, nothing stood a chance if they popped up, so I can 100% understand these changes. It can still escort duty Metzgers, and like I said, they made it slightly more easier, because escort duty now requires you to be in the same battle fleet, but again, it was fixed with the Teutonic battle fleet that we saw at the start of it, so that's a good one. And the unexpected arrival rule in general was changed so that if you're shooting any weapons on the turn you arrive, you have to do so using the crippled value of your weapons that you're firing, just to make that alpha strike slightly less scary than before. The big upside to unexpected arrival though is that it is a lot more reliable. You can just pop up whenever you want, starting at the start of round 2. But remember, you can only arrive from reserves once all your other units have actually activated, so it's only going to come in at the bottom of the second turn. So yeah, keep that in mind. And even though this is not really in chronological order in the ORBAT, I'm jumping to the Metzger next, because we see very similar changes. However, this one has gone down in fray value compared to what it used to be, so it really is a case of this is supposed to be your gunboat Colossus, while the other one is more aimed at your assault. It still gets the same changes to unexpected arrival and strategic withdrawal, and again that +2 hull points there might actually bite you in the butt if you're not careful with that one. There's a big one though. If you use this one along with Metzgers, you can with Hochmeisters, you can still probably get a nifty assault going if you go for the full unit of 3 Metzgers with a Hochmeister in tag of it. I mean, it still remains quite scary when you do so, because I asked for a clarification on that one on the Facebook group as well, and it was confirmed that there is one weapon that you can still use at full value, and that is your Claw Arc Projector. Unexpected arrival hinders your firing of weapons using the weapon's crippled profile, but that's not the case with the Claw Arc Projector. You can just ram at the effective 11 dice, sorry. So you can still get a very effective alpha strike out of a unit with Metzgers combined with a Hochmeister, should you so desire. Remember, and this is something I didn't touch upon with the Hochmeisters, you can tag in a Fury generator on that one to make that assault have a bit more oomph than before, and if you're ramming first with 3 Metzgers in it, those are going to be able to tag on extra supporting dice as well. So all is not lost, but I think the most powerful configuration you're going to see in the game right now for those things is going to be the Metzger supported with 3 Metzgers supported with a single Hochmeister. But that is a nifty points investment. That comes down to 630 points. So yeah, but more bearable for your opponent as well. The Conrad support carrier has not received a lot of changes. There's no point changes. It did receive +2 to the Citadel, but only +1 in the other version, and it has the same explanation that you need to be in the same battle fleet to escort ships. So not a lot has changed there. I like having a single Conrad support carrier simply because of the SRS recon flight rule and potentially the mine clearance if you're really having to use that in a clutch maneuver, but I think SRS tokens are still in trouble in this game, and more on why in a separate video. A new entry to the Prussians is the Kriegssturm assault airship. This is sort of the missile-shaped Zeppelin that they come, and it has a very interesting role. It is meant to go in and fire its Luftspeerschleuders at submerged targets, preferably, because again, torpedoes sort of ignore their submerged defense, making them obscured. Can never be obscured against these types of weapons. And with the high velocity rule, their defenses are also going to be circumvented in a spectacular way. So this is a very interesting ship. At 80 points for a single model, I think this is definitely worth considering. I mean, shooting down aerial ships can be quite tricky. You need specialized tools for the job if you want to take them down consistently, and yeah, they definitely bring it. They seem to be an entry where you can just pelt away with those torpedo attacks, and having 2 of them each is definitely not a bad amount of firepower for 80 points, while closing the distance, because with 9 fray as well as 2 voltaic weapons and lightning assault, and the Luftlanzer assault rule, you're getting something that can still tear ships up in close combat as well. So it is very much on point with what the Prussian Empire, what the Imperium likes to do to their opponents. So I'm really liking this entry. Next up are 2 classics, the Reiter Flak Cruiser. A bit of history on this ship. It used to be extremely problematic in its first iteration, with all of the weapons just having sustained on it. And then that was knocked down to a point where you barely wanted to use it again. And now it really has found its role into this force. First of all, it gains the anti-air specialist rule, so that big downside to the Vierling autocannon of having to be in closing range to shoot at aerial targets is no longer a case here, because you don't count units as being a range band further when shooting at aerial units. So that's a great start. The second one is the Flak Barrage with the Vierling Flak Array. you can actually shoot away enemy SRS tokens in base contact when you're shooting at friendly targets. So if something is being under attack by a lot of SRS tokens, you can shoot them out of the sky with the Reiter flak cruiser. Ironically, I think this is better defense than any of the intercepts that SRS tokens can do, so definitely worth considering a single Reiter flak cruiser, just if you want to take away the SRS threat from your opponent. That being said, the weapons have been nerfed slightly when it comes to the number of dice. That feeling flak array we discussed at the top of the video is nerfed a bit in terms of dice, but it is gained sustained against anything it is shooting at, so it's not a bad change whatsoever. However, remember that you cannot pair the flak Vierling array with the Vierling autokanonen because they have different profiles. You can only sort of link them together if you're shooting at aerial targets. So yeah, that's a bit of a change. However, it does gain +1 speed as well, and gets the Citadel bump up, and the points cost increase is only 6 points. So yeah, I can see this one working. And one that is definitely made a lot more interesting was the Schaumburg escort cruiser. It's now only 54 points. During the draft as well, I mentioned that it used to be 85 points, which is just not even worth considering, especially when you consider that the latest factions have got similar mine layer ships at 60 points and under, and it now finds itself at that similar price point, so definitely a ship now worthy of consideration. It was nerfed slightly though, because it lost a hull point in crippled state, so yeah, that's a thing, but otherwise this is now a superb entry, and one that I still have to build. It wasn't in my fleet overview, and I'm definitely considering doing that now. Next up are the two Prussian destroyers. The Sigimir destroyer has gone up substantially, I mean +4 points per model, but it did gain some way better numbers for its defenses, so you can excuse them. And remember, both of the Volt gun batteries now actually pack more dice as lead weapons. And you still get the benefits from Pack Hunter on it as well. So this rule applies while the unit numbers 3 or more models, right? Let's just go over Pack Hunter briefly. The unit gains an additional +2 to its attack and assault action dice pools, provided at least 3 models in the unit contribute to that dice pool. This makes it a bit of an interesting one, because it now fires 5 dice. Imagine you've got a unit of 3, you can go like, well, I'm shooting the first Volt gun battery of my lead ship, right? This one. And then just going, my support weapons are also just tagging 1 support alongside of it. That triggers Pack Hunter, right? And then the other volley you do is this one as lead weapon, with the 2 other ones supporting it as well. So if you count up the dice, the lead weapon's 5, the support weapon's 2, the other support weapon is 2, Pack Hunter kicks in for another 2. You're chucking a respectable 11 dice at your opponent if you divide your attacks up like this, and you're doing that twice with a Sigimir unit. 11 dice is enough to cause a critical damage hit on a lot of different ships if you're lucky, and in other cases it can often knock out enemy frigates as well with those 11 dice. So this Pack Hunter rule can make the Sigimir destroyer a very interesting option, and well worth considering with the +4 points as well, if you're a bit cheeky with the way you distribute your dice and you divide up your attacks. The Toten heavy destroyer, you don't have to do any trickery with this one when it comes to with its attack, although you can. I mean, it's got focused gunnery along with advanced storm coil, so you can also get very interesting attack distributions with it. So you can do the same or similar shenanigans with this one. It's only been increased by 1 point per model, but it did receive +2 Citadel for it, and you know, again, Citadel is an important stat when it comes to Mass 1 ships, because a single critical damage can destroy it, and it would be, you know, better defended against similar ships to the Sigimir that I just mentioned, for this kind of weird shenanigans. And it comes with focused gunnery, which is an especially weird rule because all of your gunnery attacks at the same target means you get +2 dice to all those gunnery. Now the Sturmklau in closing range has got 3-2 as the main one. Technically you can fire every Sturmklau individually for 5 dice with sustained because of this focused gunnery rule. You can really make a mess of an opponent's armor if it's not too high, because, can't forget, you get sustained on it with the advanced Sturmcoil, so those 5 dice can actually do a bit of work, because well, that's going to average to about 7 hits, and I think they also have Devastating on there, so, and they're not bothered with any shield generators because they're arc weapons, so you can have a unit that destroys an enemy ship in a death by 1,000 cuts kind of way. So the Toten Heavy Destroyer remains one of my top models in this faction. And now, the thing that you've heard me moan a few times about in the rest, I was very happy to see the Blücher get their Speerschleuder along with the Ferdinand cruiser, because I thought every one of the normal, cruiser hulls from the Prussian Imperium would have torpedoes. Sadly, this is one that I missed in the almost not a draft update. Why the hell did they put a cork in the Speerschleuder tubes in this version? It was almost perfect. Also, it went up 4 points, lost the Speerschleuder. That small little upgrade to the speed and the, to be expected at this point, +2 Citadel, that's not going to compensate for it. There's a lot more interesting entries into this ORBAT, especially with the Scandinavians coming up. And that makes it quite sad that the Volsung is officially dead and buried in this ORBAT update. I'm sorry. Now, the next bit, because this is all of the Prussian ships we've discussed, are going to be said Scandinavians, and that's definitely something fun to look forward to if you're an Imperium player. Right, on to the next big entries into the ORBAT. The Scandinavian ones are a lot more fleshed out. Now we start off with a ship that was in the previous ORBAT though, which is why I was able to say that it is now 2 points cheaper than it was. The Ragnarok Heavy Reaver. Now, the Citadel has been increased in a similar manner to all the other ships, but there weren't many other changes to it. It does seem like an interesting ship to me though, because you have got a flagship that's shooting around the board with 7 speed, which is a lot for a Mass 3 ship, and with an internal fury generator that cannot be upgraded or replaced. So technically that's speed 8, which is more what you'd expect for a cruiser rather than a battleship. Now I'm not sure if this is a battleship though, because technically in the preview art it's known as a battle cruiser, and I have shown you this picture here on top of it for your convenience, so you can see what the ship is going to roughly look like when it gets released. Now it's also no slouch in close combat, and I suppose that is completely in line with what Viking ships are supposed to be, the Scandinavian approach to naval warfare. It's got fray of 10, and along with that fury generator you're talking about something with 14 fray and 3 arc or voltaic weapons, so that's 17 dice for a ship that's going to cross the to the enemy battle lines at breakneck speed. So that's definitely one that I would consider getting, despite it maybe not being quite as heavily armored as one of the full battleships. Mind you, it is in competition of course with other Prussian ships like the Elector class, which is a lot tougher, but again this one is more an emphasis on speed and not assault. So if you just want to crank that Imperium playstyle of going in for the close kill, these Scandinavians are really up your alley. The next entry for the flagships or the Scandinavians is the Valhalla Fast Dreadnought. Now Fast Dreadnought it sure is, because speed 6 for something with mass 4 is quite a lot, and it comes with its own fury generator built in, so I expect to see it at speed 7 in practice. It also comes with 2 Sturmbringers on there, which is already kind of scary, and 3 heavy volt gun batteries, all neatly aimed at the front, which is going to be great because the supercharged munition rule is definitely going to make the most out of it. And it's not just launching a lot of attacks and a lot of firepower, this fast Dreadnought, it also gets a new type of special SRS token, which is the Vali Midget Submarine. These are of course submerged SRS tokens as you'd expect, but they can only be placed 15 inch from this unit. So they are a bit in line with what you expect from the Enlightened whales so far. They have the submerged, homing and piercing qualities though, and they attack with 5 action dice each. So if you can get all 3 of them and your opponent doesn't fail them, that's 15 dice with piercing. It's nothing to sneeze at. But the problem is, you cannot make attack runs on aerial units, or if your unit becomes aerial, you have to find a new target. But you know, that's to be expected if you're using submarines on those. So if you're, for instance, attacking one of the new French airships and it just decides to Levant surge out of there, your submarines are going to be lost and have no target. They're going to have to find a new one within 5 inch of it or just do nothing. And also they can't join combat air patrol attack runs, so they cannot combine their dice pools with any other SRS tokens, and they must make a separate attack run as is. I don't think that's a bad thing though, because with piercing you're hunting for critical hits, so this makes it a good one. And even if you're just sending out 2 of them, if you're in a crippled state, it's not a bad thing. It also has a Freya array, but oddly enough, I think this rule has not been brought in line with the new Freya array, so that's something that needs to be cleaned up in the future when this faction is released fully. Now, a last thing that I also included is the Asgard class assault carrier. This artwork is not what you're gonna expect with this Valhalla, but I'm just including it here because it was once mentioned, I should say, but this model can't be found yet in this ORBAT update. So the Scandinavians, this is definitely not everything you're seeing yet from this sub-faction. But yeah, the Valhalla fast destroyer, fast Dreadnought, definitely a thumbs up for me. I would highly consider this ship because it brings a lot to the table. And at 376 points, I think that is a very, very reasonable points cost for what it brings. I mean, that brings it sort of in line with an HMS Ark Royal for the Crown, roughly. And I don't think you're getting ripped off when you're comparing it or putting it side by side with that ship at all. Next up, the Scandinavians are also going to be receiving some Mass 1 ships, and the first one of these is the Fenrir Hunter submarine. Now, I think there's also a thing that needs to be cleaned up here. It has the Prussian trait and Scandinavian trait. It's a bit weird. I'm guessing it's going to be Scandinavian, and the Prussian keyword is just in there by mistake. But again, a bit of cleanup work can't hurt to mention it now. As it is, they come with torpedoes, and at only 30 points per model, having a submerged model with only 2 hull points, mind you, so the submerged really is going to have to do its work for it to stay protected. But that's a lot of firepower, and with Pack Hunter, if 3 of them are working together, you are going to be looking at potentially, in that case, 6 + 4 + 4 + 2, so you're talking about, oh, my math really slow today, 16 dice shooting with torpedoes if you take a unit of 3 of those, which isn't bad. I would never consider 2 of them though, if you've got the Pack Hunter rule, but yeah, that's it. And they come with Vanguard. I think this is one of the only long-range firepower options available to the Scandinavian fleet. So it's definitely not the type of Mass 1 ship that you find on the sprue and never really bother clipping out of there because it doesn't really fill a role. It definitely does. Next up, the first of the Mass 2 ships, and I think this is, if I'm looking at it, I can predict a kind of a plastic sprue where you can variate the length of the front of the ship in this case. And this one comes with the Heavy Sturmklau and the regular Sturmklau. These 2 can be tagged together because they have the same weapon qualities. And they only clock in at 72 points. I think this is their equivalent of the Monitor. And that is a very attractive price point because you are getting 2 arc weapons for a lovely fray of 11 with a full steam ahead rule, so you can drift 4 inches, and a very big 9 speed, and the first time we see power slide in this faction. It's a rule borrowed from the Sultanate, I think it's called Ikili now, the catamaran ships, and yeah, these guys can just drift up to a 90 degree left to side, and that does not consider this as a turn, so you can still use your full steam ahead and just yeah, have a bit of extra maneuverability here. The weird thing about it is, though, it has an escort duty of if you take a single one of them, and it can escort another unit. Now, I thought that was a bit weird, but it can do so in a similar vein to how a Hochmeister can escort these Metzgers. These can do it as well. I'm liking what I'm seeing for 72 points. The second Mass 1 ship that we find in the roster is the Hoth Heavy Corvette. Appears to be a Norwegian vessel in this case, and it was in the previous ORBAT. It's been upped with 2 points per model compared to the previous one, but it also gained that Citadel 10 with 3 hull points, and I'm thinking that's going to be the baseline for a lot of Mass 1 ships. I used to have the 4/8 stats in it as well. It's gotten a bit slower though. It lost 1 speed value, but I suppose 13 was a lot for an for a C ship, a normal C1, and there's a few airships out there that were probably a bit jealous of that 13, so let's just say that it's not completely unexpected. Just comes with the single Sturmklaue, but doesn't have any benefits for the advanced storm coils. So you really do want to get up close and personal with these heavy corvettes. But you know, they're fast, they're reasonably durable, and they'll be handy to block off your opponent from doing any ram actions against your big ships. So they can do an escort duty on your Scandinavian ones. Here's the thing though, you only get 2 of those heavy corvettes, but +2 ADV for the multiple to each other's ADV and SDV. That's scary. To a combined maximum of +4, you can get some really high defense values thanks to these heavy corvettes if you tag them onto your bigger flagships. So that's definitely a good option there. Liking what I'm seeing. Next up we have the ship that I think is going to be the biggest cruiser you can make out of the plastics, the Jotun Heavy Raider at 112 points. This is the one that sadly puts the Volsung to shame and into the grave. It's what I said there, and I mean it. If you look at this ship, there is no reason whatsoever to take the Volsung anymore. It just does everything it does better and cheaper, so I really think that the loss of the Speerschluder on those Volsungs was a big mistake. That being said though, I liked the Volsung in its previous iteration, and I'm liking this guy even more. 2 of the Sturmklaue to go with it. I know it's not the same as a Sturmbringer, but I would consider 2 of these to be similar. I mean, if you get the 2 small ones, they can work together quite well, especially since this one also gets focused gunnery. And with the full steam ahead rule and the speed of 8, this is a very scary and fast ship to combine with it. It also gets that aggressive crew, you know, the whole Viking crew mentality thing, so they actually assault better as well. And 2 smaller weapons is always a better thing for your lightning assault rule on top of it, so I'm really liking the look of this ship. And it still gets the heavy volt gun battery, so you can still do a bit of work on medium range as well with these ships. So yeah, big thumbs up. The Jotun Heavy Raider is definitely one I would include in the roster as well. Next up we have the ship that is named after the god of mischief, the Loki Shadow Raider. It is 2 points cheaper than the Jotun, and it does lose the normal Sturmklaue, which is gone in this position, so you get a bit less firepower for your money. However, you do get an internal shroud generator to keep you slightly more protected, and most importantly, it gains the Shadow Hunter keyword, so you can just change its position at the start of the battle, before any vanguard moves have been made. You can just set this unit up again. Borrowed from a lot of the Japanese ships, and I also have a Japanese fleet. I love that one because your opponent just doesn't know what you're going to be doing, and we found that that can be incredibly important to avoid some firepower, especially if there's a bit of a big terrain on the table before you even start. So this is a nice entry, a nice subtle difference between those two, and yeah, I can see why you'd be hard pressed to choose between one or the other. Now that Loki is a bit of the upgraded version compared to the Odin Reaver. This is the one that has the same weapon loadout, but doesn't come with all of the tricky Shadow Hunter thing, but it does gain Vanguard, so that's definitely going to help, along with the full steam ahead rule, to get into close combat, get into that boarding action really quickly. So if you're setting up for assaults, this is going to be the model that does it for you. It could also take a generator, but that would leave you very low on firepower, I think. And yeah, but I really like this one. It is sort of the backbone cruiser, I suppose, for the Scandinavian ones, and yeah, slightly lower armor, only 3 hull points in crippled state as well, but with Fray 9 and a decent amount of speed. It was nerfed slightly, it used to be 9 speed. It's still an option I would consider though. And it has a very clearly different role compared to the Blücher that the Prussians now use, because how the torpedoes are no longer there. Well, sorry, how the torpedoes are there now on the Blücher, so there's a different role for it. 96 points though, I think might just be a bit on the steep end of the scale, but that remains to be seen in playtesting, I suppose. But it's definitely one worth considering. I also think that we're going to see this release fairly quickly, because there's the fully fledged artwork in this ORBAT, which always points to an imminent release. And then the last entry into the Scandinavian set is a third Mass 1 ship, which makes me think like, well, there have to be at least 2 plastic sprues for the Scandinavians coming then, if this is the setup for it. It can't just be a single sprue, because fitting on 3 different Mass 1 ships on there seems tricky to do, but we'll see. The Valkyrie is a flying unit. It's the Hunt rotor, so I'm guessing once it comes out, it's going to have a few of those helicopter rotors on there. But it comes armed to the teeth as well. I mean, with a Sturmklau in the front of it, and a Vierling autocannon also aimed at the front. You're getting a fairly hefty amount of firepower for 40 points per model. That is 3 points per model more than the previous entry, but they gained Pack Hunter for it, and especially because you're now shooting multiple smaller weapons together, that Pack Hunter means that 2 Valkyrie Hunt rotors isn't really an option. You'd always want to take 3 of them. So you're looking at a bare bones 120 points unit. You probably want to have 160, because if one of them gets shot out of the sky when you've only got 3 of them, you know, you're sort of, a lot of the sting is taken out of it if it has Pack Hunter. So yeah, I am liking though what I'm seeing for a ship that is this fast, still has 3 hull points, and isn't just that easy to blast out of the sky with standard weapons. Rocket batteries might be able to do the trick if they're shooting a bit well, but yeah, I mean, turn 2 you're going to be up in the opponent's face with these Valkyrie Hunt rotors, and in a force that you're essentially just trying to hold off for as long as humanly possible with these Scandinavians. I could see this one playing a vital role in putting some pressure on the opponent, and yeah, you're gonna have to be stopping them along a long front if you want to stop the Scandinavians at all. I'm really liking these entries. I can't wait to see the actual models when they are released. Up next, we're taking a look at the Bavarian Airships, which are also included in this new ORBAT. This is the first ship I want to start off with for the Bavarians. This has got the keyword, but when I'm looking at this ship, I'm seeing that it is lore-wise based on the Prussian Kriegssturm rigid airframe, and that makes complete sense when you look at the stats that the actual ship has. The only difference really is in the armament. This one has an Übervolt Vierling mounted in the nose, and it can be changed out for a pair of Luftspeerschleuders for no extra cost. And if you do so, you would have the exact same configuration of the Prussian Kriegssturm that I've already discussed. So I am guessing that when we see the Bavarian box coming out, that there's going to be some double build options of them either having the Prussian keyword or them having a separate Bavarian fleet in and of itself. In the same way that the Zeppelin assault dreadnought that I started the video off with had the Prussian keyword, and I said like there's something weird going on. There's no launch platform mentioned anywhere on the Zeppelin, despite the artwork pointing towards that. I'm thinking that that may be the Bavarian option, the one that has SRS carry capacity, because I'm a bit stumped with these. I mean, again, I like what I'm seeing. At 80 points per model, you're not getting ripped off at all. You do want to consider these ships because of what they can do. And they also have a very fun little Bavarian rule, the In Treue Fest, meaning that if they support the attacks from each other, with the Bavarian trait you can get +1 action dice with 2 or more models supporting it. So you can get some extra shots out of there if they work together. Truly festive activities going on there. But yeah, I'm liking what I'm seeing with the Nuremberg heavy airship, and seeing as they come in a pair, I think this is definitely the first one I'll be building. The Bavarians are also going to be sending in Mass 1 ship, and the ships, and the Munich aerial destroyer is the first one. And it's an interesting one. I mean, it moves very, very fast with 13 speed, and has got 3 hull points baseline, so it is a lot for a Mass 1 ship at 45 points. It means it's even more expensive than the Toten class, but when you're looking at what it does, it comes with 3 of those Rüdiger autocannons mounted in the front. And I've taken the stats or copy-pasted them from the start just to see what an interesting weapon that is. I already mentioned with 1 dice in support at closing range, you don't want to ever fire this at anything with a blade of armor, because it's not really going to do anything. But thanks to this In Treue Fest rule that we find on Bavarians, you can gain 1 extra action dice if you're working together with another model with the Bavarian trait. And if you take them in duels of 2, and you have to buy them per 2 for 90 points, you can do some pretty interesting stuff with this, because you've also got focused gunnery with it, which means that as long as all of your gunnery attacks, and that's the Rüdiger auto cannons, that's the only weapon they have, are all shooting at the same initial target, you get +2 dice to all the gunnery attack action. So if we get our little attack divider again, your lead weapon is going to be shooting 3 attacks. You're going to be supporting that one with 1 extra weapon from another ship, right? And because of that, you're going to be gaining an extra dice for In Treue Fest. And as long as you all are firing at the same cruiser, you can get an extra +2 attacks for that one. Meaning you come to a decent 7 dice. Why do I say that's decent? It's a sustained attack. That's going to plink off a hull point, potentially from even flagships, if you do so. And if you're taking this in a minimum squadron of 90 points, you can do that a hefty 3 times. With that, 3 times 7 dice, thanks to all of this additional dice that you're getting, and that's just at the worst bracket you can find yourself in. Because, well, you can ignore this one. These Mass 1 ships are never going to be finding themselves in a crippled state. And if you get close and personal in the point blank range, That's going to be 4 plus 2 plus 1 plus 2. So you're just gaining an extra 2 dice for 9 dice with sustained. That can actually pierce the occasional citadel of a cruiser as well. So again, this is one of those ships that can, very much in the same vein as the Toten class, cause a death by 1,000 cuts, and you just melting away hull points very, very quickly if your opponent doesn't respond to these things. And with speed 13, you don't have to be too worried about not being able to get into that long range bracket. I mean, they can do their work, and I'm really liking what I'm seeing with these. Fragile, but all things considered, if you're doing a bit of a cheeky distribution of your attacks, you can get a lot of firepower out of this unit, and I'm really liking it. There was one Prussian ship that I did not discuss when we were doing the Prussian ships, and that was because you sort of have to look at this one side by side with that recently discussed Munich class. I think this is, again, the similar ship that you can build as either the Munich or the Jaeger aerial fast destroyer. And what does it do? Well, for seemingly no points increase, you can change one of those Rüdiger autocannons for a heavy Sturmklau. And one would think that is a straight up upgrade. And you would go like, why is this the same point? That makes the Munich obsolete in my book. But like I just said with the Munich, you can do some very interesting things with both that in Treue Fest and focused gunnery, and this thing does not have either of those rules. So the potential damage output of these two Rüdiger autocannons, especially in this bracket of closing range, takes an absolute nosedive because of how these rules with the Munich worked. And you do get, however, the single heavy Sturmklaue as compensation on a ship that can actually close the distance relatively fast. But I'm not sure if I would take this one, the Jaeger, over the Munich, for that same reason. I mean, it's an interesting one if you don't want to be screwing around with your attack distribution. And let's be honest, some people, when they look at these sort of things and they think at targets, can get stuck in a bit of an analysis paralysis thing. This is a way more straightforward unit to operate. You just bundle your Sturmklaue together, and you bundle your Rüdiger autocannons together, or you're not getting anything out of it. Now that Sturmklaue, the heavy Sturmklaue, is definitely going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting for the damage output, but those two Rüdiger autocannons might not. That might just be an attack that outright fails, because if you take a unit of 4 of these, and you're in closing range, you're only getting 6 dice once out of the Rüdiger autocannons if you pull all of them together. That alone is worse than just, you know, those 2 ones shooting at the same target like we discussed with the Munich. That being said though, the heavy Sturmklaue attack does make up for a lot of it for a single 11 dice attack with gunnery, devastating and arc, so, you know, up in the air what you want to take. The Jaeger is definitely the simpler one to have a no-brainer attack distribution with, whereas the Munich is probably slightly more finesse in working out how you have to shoot at it. And it's an interesting proposition. I can see both of them working, but I think my preference would go out to the Munich. Interesting thing though, let me think, or mention what you think of it in the comments below if you have one preference or another. Right, I'm going to end off this video with this little bit of artwork. We know that it is coming soon. They mentioned it at the UK Games Expo, but I'm really curious to see how they are going to do this release. I believe they said that this wasn't a plastic ship. I remember that somewhere in the back of my head. And seeing how they have double plastic ships, or rather double builds for the original ones, I do wonder how they're going to make this one. Is this flagship going to be a single plastic sprue that builds this monstrous one, and then you get 2 of the smaller, what you call frontline squadrons, I suppose, for the airships? I'm thinking it's going to go that route, but I really can't say. It would be nice to see that they are making larger, bigger plastic models like this as well, because I think their plastic development team is making serious advances, and they keep getting better and better. So I can imagine this ship being a single mass one, and potentially with a double build, because like I said, that Prussian version, the rules don't line up with something that is launching SRS tokens. So I did do an overview of the different Bavarian airships, but I think this one might still need a bit of polish when the actual release gets here. I'm pretty sure that one is going to be here fairly fast as well. I mean, Dystopian Wars really is getting a monstrous release pace right now, so yeah, exciting times ahead. And with those closing thoughts, I leave this very long video behind. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Bye!